Frank DeLuca grabbed my arm the moment I walked through the back door of his woodworking shop. He did not say hello. He did not offer me coffee. He just pulled me past the sawdust-covered workbenches and the half-finished cabinets, through a narrow doorway, and into the small, cluttered storage room at the back of the building. He shut the door behind us and pressed his back against it. I had known Frank for 31 years. We had coached Little League together, attended each other's retirement parties, and sat side by side at our wives' funerals. I had never once seen Frank DeLuca look frightened. He looked frightened now. He did not speak for a long moment. He just stared at the floor, his jaw working silently, as if he were rehearsing sentences and discarding them one by one. Then he looked up at me and said, in a voice so quiet I had to lean forward to hear it, "Walter, you need to listen to me very carefully before you go back to that house, because I don't think you understand what's happening to you. My name is Walter Crane. I am 67 years old. For 32 years, I built a regional chain of urgent care medical clinics across 4 states, starting with 1 rented exam room and a used ultrasound machine, ending with 41 locations and a staff of over 400. I negotiated with hospital systems that wanted to absorb me. I survived 3 malpractice suits that were all ultimately dismissed. I sat across conference tables from men who smiled at me while planning to gut my business from the inside. I am not a man who frightens easily, but standing in that storage room, with Frank's face the color of old ash and his hands pressed flat against the door, I felt something cold move through my chest that I had not felt in a very long time. I asked him what he meant. He turned around and picked up a manila folder from the top of a paint-stained shelf. He set it on the workbench between us and opened it. Inside were printed screenshots, photographs taken of a phone screen with a separate camera, slightly blurred at the edges but entirely readable. "My daughter works at the bank on Meridian," Frank said. "She processed a wire transfer 2 days ago. 6 figures, out of your personal savings account, routed to a holding company she didn't recognize." He paused. She almost didn't say anything, but the account name matched a company my son-in-law warned her about 6 months ago. One of those shell LLCs that show up in financial fraud cases. He pressed a finger against the top page. "Walter, the authorization signature on that transfer is yours, but the notary stamp on the supporting documents belongs to a man who lost his license to practice in this state 4 years ago." I stood very still and looked at the pages. I thought about my son, Marcus, who had come to live with me 8 months ago after his divorce, who had brought his new girlfriend Renata with him, who told me she was a certified financial planner, and that between the 2 of them, they wanted to make sure my affairs were in order as I got older. I thought about how Renata had gently suggested, about 5 months ago, that I let her help manage my quarterly statements since my eyesight had been giving me trouble. I thought about how Marcus had been looking lately slow, unfocused, sleeping until noon, forgetting conversations we'd had the day before. I thought about the health supplements Renata had started adding to my morning orange juice 8 months ago. I thought about the tremors in my hands that my own doctor couldn't explain, the brain fog that descended every afternoon like a curtain being drawn, the way entire weeks had begun slipping past me like water through open fingers. Something clicked into place with a sound I felt more than heard. I closed the folder, looked at Frank, and told him to make a copy of everything and keep the originals somewhere Renata would never find them. Then I told him I was going home and that I needed him to trust me for a little while before we involved anyone else. He grabbed my sleeve as I turned toward the door. I looked at him until he let go. I told him I had my reasons and that I would explain everything soon. He looked like he wanted to argue. He didn't. The drive back to the house on Clearwater Ridge took 20 minutes. I used every second of it. Renata had moved into that house 6 weeks after Marcus brought her home to meet me. She was 41, dark-haired, meticulous, and relentlessly pleasant, in the way that certain very dangerous people are relentlessly pleasant, all surface, no warmth behind the surface. She managed Marcus with a soft authority that looked like devotion from the outside. She managed me with a performance of daughterly concern so consistent, I had almost believed it. I pulled into the garage and sat in the car for a full minute before going inside. I made a decision in that minute that would require me to become someone I had never been, a man, pretending to diminish, while actually building toward one precise, final moment. It was not a comfortable decision, but I had spent 32 years making uncomfortable decisions, and I understood that the discomfort of doing nothing was always worse. I walked through the door into the kitchen, wearing the expression of a man who had simply been to visit an old friend. Renata was at the counter, slicing fruit with focused, efficient movements. She looked up and smiled. "How's Frank?" she asked. "Getting old like the rest of us," I said. That night at dinner, I set the trap carefully. I waited until Marcus had finished most of his food, and then I mentioned, in a mildly confused tone, that I had received a notification on my phone about a large withdrawal from my savings account. I said I couldn't quite make sense of the numbers and asked if either of them knew anything about it. Marcus looked at Renata. That was all I needed to see, that single reflexive glance toward her before he said a single word to me. Renata set her fork down with a small, patient smile. She explained that she had initiated a portfolio rebalancing transfer on my behalf, moving liquid assets into a higher-yield vehicle we had all discussed at dinner 2 Sundays ago. She said she was sorry the notification confused me and that she would walk me through the full statement after dinner so I wouldn't worry. I frowned and said I didn't remember any dinner discussion about it. Marcus let out a tired sigh. He rubbed the bridge of his nose. "Dad, we went over this for almost an hour," he said quietly. "You asked really specific questions about the interest rates. You seemed totally clear on it." He looked at me with an expression I recognized, not cruelty, but a practiced sadness. The expression of a man who had been told for months that his father was declining. "The doctor said your memory would get patchy with the new medication adjustment. That's normal. You don't need to apologize for it." The new medication adjustment. I had not changed any medication. I had not seen my primary care physician in 11 months because every time I scheduled an appointment, something came up at the last minute. A family obligation Renata had quietly engineered, a scheduling conflict that materialized from nowhere. I had a doctor whose name I did not know being referenced as the authority on my own health. I let my shoulders drop. I told them they were probably right and that I was just tired. I excused myself early and went upstairs. Behind the locked door of my bedroom, I sat at the edge of the mattress and held my own hands in front of my face. The tremors were there, faint but real. The fog that settled over my afternoons was real. These were not the products of a failing mind. Someone had introduced them deliberately and systematically, and I had been too impaired to see it clearly until Frank put a folder in my hands. I understood then why I couldn't go straight to the police. Marcus had been ingesting whatever Renata was putting in our morning juice for months. His cognitive state was fragile, his nervous system potentially dependent on compounds I knew nothing about. A sudden intervention police at the door, Renata arrested, the supply cut off abruptly, could send Marcus into a medical crisis before anyone understood what was in his system. I needed to know what she was using. I needed to get it out of both of us slowly and safely. And I needed to do all of it while she believed she was winning. I needed to give her a convincing old man to look at every morning. I had spent my career in medicine. I knew exactly what cognitive decline looked like. The performance began the following morning. I came downstairs slower than usual, one hand trailing along the wall. I sat at the kitchen table and stared at the crossword puzzle in the newspaper without filling in a single word. When Renata placed the glass of orange juice in front of me, I thanked her and picked it up with both hands, the way a man with weakened grip control would. The moment her back turned toward the stove, I poured the juice into the wide-mouthed thermos I had prepped inside my robe pocket, leaving just enough liquid in the glass to leave a residue ring. I did the same for Marcus's glass. He was already showing the symptoms: the morning lethargy, the slow speech, the way he blinked at things longer than necessary, as if the world were slightly out of focus. I had not told him anything yet. Telling him would require him to perform alongside me, and I was not sure he could manage it in his current state without giving us both away. I mailed the thermos contents to an independent toxicology laboratory in a neighboring state, using Frank's address as the return. The laboratory Frank had found for me operated outside the standard reporting registry, which meant the results would come directly to us without triggering any automated flags. While I waited, I became the old man Renata expected me to be. I forgot names at the table. I called Marcus by my late brother's name twice in 1 week. I wandered into the living room during one of Renata's phone calls, looked directly at her without appearing to register her presence, and shuffled back out again. I watched her face in those moments with the peripheral attention of someone who has spent decades reading patients, the micro-expressions, the rapid recalculation behind the eyes. Each time I performed a convincing moment of confusion, her posture relaxed by a measurable degree. Her phone calls on the back porch got longer. Her voice dropped the careful low register she had maintained around me for months. She was becoming careless. Careless people leave evidence. On a Thursday morning, 11 days after I had mailed the thermos, Frank called me on the old prepaid phone I had bought with cash and hidden behind the garden tools in the garage. The laboratory results were back. I told Renata I was going for my daily walk. She nodded, without looking up from her laptop. I walked 3 blocks to the elementary school parking lot where Frank was waiting in his truck. He handed me an envelope through the window without a word. I opened it standing between 2 parked minivans. The report was 4 pages. I understood every word of it. I had spent 32 years in medical administration, and I had read enough clinical pharmacology to follow the chemical designations without a glossary. The compounds in the juice were not vitamins. They were not supplements. The first was a low-dose benzodiazepine derivative, the kind used in controlled clinical settings to manage severe anxiety disorders, delivered here in daily microdoses calibrated to produce fatigue, memory softening, and reduced executive function without producing obvious sedation. The second compound was something newer and uglier, a synthetic that suppressed the formation of short-term memories by disrupting acetylcholine pathways. In plain language, she wasn't making us sleepy. She was making us forget. She was making sure that even when we were awake and present, the day would leave no clear impression behind it. I folded the report and put it in my jacket pocket. I thanked Frank. He looked at me for a long moment and asked if I was all right. I told him I was better than I'd been in months, because now I understood exactly what I was fighting. I needed 2 more things before I could move. I needed the paper trail documenting what she had taken, and I needed to know who she was working with, because no one runs a scheme this sophisticated alone. The paper trail lived in her laptop, which she kept password-protected and physically present on her person for most of the day. But she was a creature of routine, and routines have gaps. Every Friday afternoon she took a 90-minute yoga class at a studio 12 minutes from the house. She left at 2:15. She was back by 4. She left the laptop on the desk in the small office she had claimed on the 2nd floor locked, but with a standard privacy lock, not a security bolt. I had watched her type the laptop password twice from angles she didn't realize permitted observation. It was Marcus's birthday, the year and the date, all run together. I sat down at her desk at 2:22 on a Friday afternoon. I had 50 minutes. What I found in the next 40 minutes rewrote everything I thought I understood about the past 8 months. Renata's real name was not Renata Voss. The email chains I found, routed through 2 separate encrypted accounts, addressed her as Carla, and Carla had been operating variations of this same scheme in 2 other states over the past 7 years. The man she was coordinating with on the financial side was a former securities broker named Donovan Mills, who had been barred from trading by the Financial Industry Regulatory Authority 3 years ago and was currently operating as a private wealth consultant without a license. The 2 of them were not just romantic partners. They were business partners in the precise sense there were shared accounts, split percentages agreed upon in writing, and a timeline that included my name with a target completion date 6 weeks away. The transfer Frank's daughter had flagged was not the first. It was the 4th. 3 previous wire transfers, smaller and spread across different account types, had already cleared. Combined, she had moved just over $400,000 out of accounts I had believed were secure. But the transfer activity told only part of the story. The emails to Donovan painted the rest of it. She was building a case, a paper case, assembled from documents Marcus had signed without reading, and a series of informal voice memos she had recorded of me during my most fog-addled moments. She had compiled them into a file she called capacity documentation. She was going to use it to petition for conservatorship, place my assets under her management legally, and once that legal mechanism was in place, she intended to liquidate the clinic portfolio I had retained as an investment holding and move the proceeds through one of Donovan's offshore vehicles. She also intended to disappear. The emails made that plain. There was a date referenced repeatedly 60 days out from now, and the phrase "clean exit" appeared in 3 separate messages. She would take legal control of my assets, drain them through channels that would take federal investigators months to unravel, And then she would vanish. Donovan would vanish, and Marcus, my son, would be left behind, legally entangled in documents bearing his signature, potentially facing questions he would be too impaired to answer coherently. She was going to use my son as her alibi and her exit ramp simultaneously. I photographed every page with the secondary phone. I reorganized the file structure exactly as I found it. I was back in my bedroom with the door locked by 3:47. I sat in the chair by the window and made myself breathe slowly for 10 minutes before I called Frank. He connected me, through a contact of his own, to a woman named Patricia Holden. Patricia was a retired federal prosecutor who now ran a small but very precise private legal practice focused exclusively on financial crime and elder exploitation. Frank had researched her himself. She took my call the same evening. She did not express sympathy. She asked questions specific, ordered, relentless questions for 45 minutes. When I finished answering, she was quiet for a moment. Then she told me that what I had described was prosecutable on multiple federal counts, that the evidence I had gathered was admissible provided I had not violated any statutes in obtaining it from a shared residence computer, and that the toxicology report alone was sufficient to support criminal charges of intentional poisoning. She said she would begin building the legal counteraction immediately. She also told me, without softening it, that the most dangerous part of my situation was not financial. It was my son. She said that depending on what compounds she had been using and for how long, an abrupt cessation could produce serious neurological effects, and that a medically supervised tapering was both necessary and non-negotiable. I already knew that, but hearing it from her made it more real and more urgent. The tapering began the following Monday. Every morning, I diverted our juice into the thermos and replaced it with fresh pressed juice I brought in from a grocery store 4 miles away. I kept the substitution bottles in a box in my car, out of the house entirely. Each week, I reduced the trace amounts I allowed into Marcus's portion, small enough reductions that the withdrawal would be gradual, manageable, invisible to someone watching for signs of rebellion. By the end of the 3rd week, Marcus began to surface. It was subtle at first. He would hold a conversation longer before losing the thread. He started reading after dinner again, something he hadn't done in months. Then, one morning, I looked across the kitchen table and found him watching Renata with an expression I had not seen on his face in a very long time. Not love, not the dull compliance of the fog, but something watchful and uncertain. He was coming back. I knew what I had to do. I waited for a night when Renata had taken her nightly bath 40 minutes, invariably, with the door locked and the exhaust fan running. I knocked softly on Marcus's bedroom door and gestured for him to follow me downstairs. We sat at the kitchen table with the lights low and the TV on in the other room as background noise. I did not cushion any of it. I laid the toxicology report in front of him. I showed him the photographs of Renata's emails. I showed him the wire transfer documentation, the capacity documentation file she had assembled, the exit timeline with the date circled. He went through 3 separate emotional states in about 4 minutes. The first was flat disbelief, the face of someone whose brain is refusing to process input that contradicts 8 months of deeply installed narrative. The second was a physical thing, a visible wave of something moving through him that started at his jaw and ended in his hands, which he pressed flat against the tabletop to keep them still. The third was grief. He put his face in his hands and his shoulders shook once, hard, and then he was still. I gave him 90 seconds. Then I told him the same thing I would have told him in a board meeting, where the situation was bad and the window was closing, that we did not have the luxury of processing this slowly, that our window was narrow, and that I needed him present and sharp for what came next. He raised his head. He wiped his face with the back of his hand. He looked at me the way he had looked at me when he was 12 years old, and asking if things were going to be okay. Except this time he already knew the answer. He said, "Tell me what you need me to do." Patricia had been working for 19 days by the time we were ready. She had coordinated with federal contacts inside the Financial Crimes Unit, obtained a court authorization for electronic monitoring of the accounts Renata had been using for transfers, and built a case file that she described, without apparent emotion, as one of the cleanest elder exploitation cases she had seen in terms of documentary evidence. Donovan Mills had made the additional error of conducting 2 of the wire transfers across state lines using interstate banking systems, which elevated several of the charges to federal jurisdiction. He was already under separate surveillance by the time Patricia connected the 2 files. She proposed a meeting. Renata received a letter through Patricia's office, routed to appear routine, advising her that a standard review of the accounts associated with my estate planning had been scheduled and requesting her presence at a downtown office on a specific Thursday morning. The letter was precise and bureaucratic and entirely unthreatening. It referenced her role as my financial representative and asked her to bring documentation she had already gathered as part of the conservatorship preparation process. She told me about it at dinner that Wednesday. She said it was a routine formality, nothing to worry about, and that she would handle everything. She said I should stay home and rest. I told her that sounded fine and asked what was for breakfast the next morning. She went to bed early. Marcus and I exchanged one look across the table and said nothing. Thursday morning, I came downstairs in my good suit. Renata was already dressed, her briefcase on the counter. Her expression settled into its default register of competent calm. She looked at me with the kind of paused attention that suggested rapid recalculation. I told her I had decided to come along, that I felt sharper today than I had in months, and that I wanted to understand what was being reviewed. She produced a smile without a beat of hesitation. She said, of course, that would be wonderful, that she was glad I was having a clear day. The office was on the 14th floor of a building downtown. The lobby was quiet. The elevator was fast. Renata walked ahead of us with the slight forward lean of a person who believes they are in complete control of the environment they are entering. The receptionist showed us into a conference room. Renata took the chair at the far end of the table and set her briefcase in front of her with a soft click. I sat down slowly, keeping my posture softened, my eyes slightly unfocused. Then the door opened again and Patricia Holden walked in. Behind her came 2 federal agents in dark jackets. Behind them came a third agent carrying a second briefcase. Renata's eyes moved from Patricia to the agents and then to me. Something shifted in her face in that moment, not fear yet, but the first fracture in absolute confidence, the first indication that the room was not configured the way she had expected. Patricia sat at the head of the table. She did not open with pleasantries. She opened the briefcase, removed a thick bound document, and placed it on the table's surface with the particular unhurried authority of someone who has done this many times. She identified herself, her federal co-counsels, and the nature of the proceeding. She stated that the meeting had been convened to execute an asset protection order, freeze all external accounts associated with the transfer activity in her documentation, and present Renata Voss or Carla Mears as her sealed record in the Southern District identified her with formal notice of federal charges including elder financial exploitation, criminal conspiracy, interstate wire fraud, and intentional administration of controlled substances without a prescription. The room was silent for about 4 seconds. Renata stood up, not frantically with control, with the upright posture of someone still calculating exit options. She looked at me with an expression I will carry with me for a long time, because there was no performance left in it. It was entirely unguarded. It was the face of someone who had believed they understood a situation completely and had just discovered they understood nothing. "Walter," she said. Her voice was even, impressively even. "This is a misunderstanding. I have been protecting your estate. Your son's signature is on every document. Every single transfer was authorized by your family." I looked at her without the performance. I sat straight. I let her see the man who had built 41 medical clinics from one rented exam room. "My son was not capable of authorizing anything," I said. "You made certain of that every morning for 8 months. The control in her face gave way in sections, like ice separating. Marcus stood up from the chair beside mine. He had been still the entire time, so still that I think she had ceased tracking him, the way you stop watching a piece of furniture. He straightened to his full height. He looked at her with the eyes of a man who has been systematically robbed of his own mind and has arrived on the other side of it, with nothing left to lose except his dignity, which he had decided to keep. "I remember the first morning," he said quietly. "You made me a smoothie and told me it had protein powder for my gym routine. I was grateful. I thanked you." He paused. "I'm done now." One of the agents moved forward. Renata took 1 step backward and then stopped moving. The calculation was over. There was nowhere to go. Donovan Mills was taken into custody at an airport in another state the same morning. He had been booked on a flight to a country without an extradition treaty. The federal monitoring that Patricia had arranged meant his accounts were frozen before he reached the gate. He was detained at security, still holding a carry-on bag containing a laptop with every financial record Patricia needed and had not yet been able to subpoena. Some people are extraordinarily good at running schemes and extraordinarily poor at knowing when the scheme is over. 4 months have passed since that Thursday. The legal proceedings are ongoing, federal cases move at their own pace, but the outcome, according to Patricia, is not in meaningful doubt. The asset freeze captured the bulk of what had been transferred. The recovery process is slow, but the documentation Renata herself compiled, the capacity file she built to use against me, turned out to be the most useful exhibit in the prosecution's possession. Every memo she recorded, every observation she documented to demonstrate my supposed incompetence, became a time-stamped record of exactly when she was present in my home and exactly what she was witnessing during the period when she was also administering controlled substances to a 67-year-old man without his knowledge or consent. She built the evidence of her own crimes while trying to build a case for taking my freedom. Marcus completed a supervised medical detox 8 weeks ago. The process was not easy. There were nights in the first week I sat outside his door and listened to him struggle with withdrawal effects that no father should watch his child experience. But the medical team Patricia connected us with was skilled and attentive, and Marcus came through it with a clarity that I had genuinely feared I would not see again in his eyes. He is back at work now remotely, from the house, managing a small portfolio of real estate investments he had been developing before all of this began. He is attending therapy twice a week. He does not talk about Renata very often. When he does, there is no rage in it, which I think means the healing is real rather than suppressed. This morning I made the coffee. I make it every morning now, the way I always used to before any of this happened strong. In the old percolator I brought out from the back of the cabinet, served in the heavy ceramic mugs my wife chose 30 years ago. Marcus came downstairs and sat at the table, and we read the paper together without speaking for a while, the way two people do when they have survived something and found, on the other side of it, that the ordinary morning is actually the point of the whole thing. My son looked up at one point and said, "You knew, didn't you? Even before Frank." I thought about that for a moment. I told him I hadn't known, but something in me had been trying to know, pushing against the fog, refusing to fully accept the story I was being told about my own mind. I told him that whatever they put in that juice was powerful, but it was not powerful enough to make me forget who I had spent 67 years becoming. He nodded and went back to his paper. The house is ours again. The accounts are in recovery. The legal machinery is grinding forward without our daily involvement. We are not the same as we were before last year. Something changed in us that does not change back entirely. Some awareness of how quickly the ground can shift beneath a life you believe is stable. But we are here. We are clear-headed. We are together. If you are watching this, and something in this story sounds familiar, if there is someone in your home who has quietly reorganized your life around their access to it, if your memory feels different than it used to and no one has given you a satisfying explanation, if the people who claim to be protecting you are also the only ones who control your access to information about yourself, pay attention to that feeling. It is not weakness. It is not old age. It is your mind trying to tell you something true. Trust the people who knew you before. And never, under any circumstances, mistake a quiet man for a defeated one. If this story meant something to you today, I'd ask you to share it with someone who might need to hear it. And if you've ever had to fight for your own mind or your own name, I'd genuinely love to hear your story in the comments, because those of us who've been through it have something to say to each other that no one else quite understands. Stay sharp, friends. Stay sharp.